This week on the Redeemed Marriage Podcast, we are picking up with our little series that we started a couple of weeks ago called The Lies That We Believe About Marriage. And this week we're going to be talking about whether or not you can fall out of love. And probably because we're in a series about lies, you're going to probably be able to tell that we think that that's a lie. But maybe not. There might be some good...
There might be a twist.
There might be a twist. So stay tuned. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Redeemed Marriage Podcast. Rusty and Heather Bryant here with you. And like we said on our intro, this is week number 3 of the lies that we believe about marriage, or some people believe, because I guess everybody doesn't believe these lies. Surely they don't.
Nah. They're probably tempted to. How's
right.
that?
People that are we're tempted to believe these lies. And this one's going to be a little bit of an interesting discussion because I think there's more layers to it that we can kind of unpack as we go. First of all, if you are not from Mississippi, you have probably heard that there have been some really devastating storms over the last few days. And again, don't know when you're listening to this, but we had some massive tornadoes come through. And so we just ask you to pray for the people that are in particularly Rolling Fork and the areas around that. I know that that was the big one that just pretty much devastated that entire community, and it's a little bit north of us, so we were not affected by that. However, we got more storms last night, and it did affect us. Not anything like those people, so we have very minor inconveniences compared to what they have. And, of course, one of those is that we are still without power. And so we weren't able to record our podcast last night. We're in a different place.
Yeah.
We're not even at our house because we have no power. So we are recording this from somewhere else today, actually my office. And we're hoping to get this put at, it'll hopefully go live, and it doesn't matter. You don't know, because as soon as it goes live, that's when you're going to hear it. So it doesn't really matter. None of that really matters, except we want you to pray for the people in Mississippi.
That's right.
So thank you for that. And some people on social media have already reached out, and we know that, I mean, we've heard people in other countries that know about the tornadoes. So so thank
it's
you.
National news for sure.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's a big deal. And so lots of people in lots of need and hurt right now. So thank you for remembering them. All right. So today, another topic, we're going to talk about, can you fall out of love? And look, let's just go ahead and say we feel like, on the surface at least, like that's not a thing. Like that we do, you hear all the time, love is a verb. Mm-hmm. And so we believe that, that love is something that it's an action, and it's something that you work towards. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today and just see, because, I do think there's lots of layers to this. Like, can you fall out of one of the different types of love that the Bible mentions? Because there's different words for different types of love in the Bible. So let's roll.
Well, before we roll, let me just say
let's roll.
that I hear often, and as listeners, you may have said it before, I just don't love him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't love her anymore.
Yeah.
Or the person she has become, I don't love anymore.
Yeah.
And so I don't think, I think a lot of people would say, and that are listening may say, yeah, that's me. Mm-hmm. I've fallen out of love with that person. And so when they hear, we don't think that that's a real thing, they may be like, I ain't listening to this, or I don't agree. Mm-hmm. And so let's dig in and talk about it a good bit. I will say that in our season of marital infidelity, is that the word?
Sure.
Marital infidelity, that I had a short season of that where I was like, oh, well, I love this person and this isn't my life anymore. Like maybe I don't love Rusty anymore. So, I mean, like that was a real feeling. It was a real lie, but it was a real feeling. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that can be a feeling that you feel, but it's not a true feeling. It's not a feeling based in truth.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw out that I've been there. And that there's people all over that say that. I just don't love them anymore. We're just getting a divorce because mommy and daddy don't love each other anymore. It's not, I mean, you hear it in movies all the time. We love you, like talking to the kid. We love you, but we just don't love each other anymore. And so I just think that's a real thing that people feel. So I just wanted to acknowledge that up front.
Well, I think if I was sitting with somebody and they just asked me the question, can you fall out of love? I would say no. I would say, no, you can't fall out of love. But then when I try to just start thinking about all the different parts of it, it's just a lot more complex than just saying that. And, where I tend to first fall is your spouse. When you married your spouse, you committed to and made a covenant and vows to love your spouse from death. I mean, until death do you part. From that day forward until death do you part. And I know not everybody says the exact same vows, but basically you do. You say the words and you commit to love and cherish and all of that. And so if that's a commitment that you've made, then you're actually admitting on that day.
Right. Well,
I can't fall out of love. I am saying to you that I will love you until the day that one of us die.
Well, and with that being said, when you're standing at the altar making that commitment, you're not standing there thinking that one day you're going to fall out of love with them. Like you were saying in that moment that you can't imagine life ever being about anything other than being in love with them. Like you can't imagine falling out of love or you wouldn't be standing there, Like I just don't, I don't think, like I just think sometimes I want to say to people, let's go back to your wedding day. Like let's remember those, like how you felt on your wedding day when you were walking down the aisle or when you saw your wife walking down the aisle. Like what were those feelings? Like let's revisit that. Like I think it's important to remember those emotions and remember that deep, deep love and excitement that you had on your wedding day. I think that that's real important to go to revisit because I think it's easy for years down the line to just kind of forget your wedding day and forget who you were and who your spouse was at that time.
Yeah. Well, if somebody comes, though, and says, but I just don't feel that way anymore. I don't feel that way about them, or they're not the same person that I married, which even to that I would say, no, they're probably not, but you're probably not the same person either. Right. And, but you could make the argument, yeah, but they're not lovable anymore, like the things that they're doing. And
you hear people say, like, we grew apart. I grew up this direction and they grew up that direction.
And so I do think that there's people out there that are like, I am stuck because my spouse has not really, they haven't done something that would give me biblical grounds of divorce. I'm not in danger. There's not abuse. There's not, there hasn't been infidelity. And so they're like, but I just don't love them. And so I'm just stuck here. And, that's when I would say you haven't fallen out of love. You're you just lost that love and feeling.
You lost that.
No, I'm not making a joke of it because I do know that it is very, very real.
Sure.
And those, but I also really believe that scenario, those are feelings.
Sure. Oh, 100%.
And so, what do you do? What are the things that you do to try to get that feeling back? So yesterday when we were talking about this, I threw out that the Bible, talks about love, and there's actually lots of different words for love in the Bible, but the three that come up a lot are agape love, which that's the unconditional love. That's what the love that God has for us. And that's supposed to be the unconditional love also. I mean, I believe that would be the unconditional love that we have for our spouse as well. But then there's also the phileo love, which is where Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, that's where those words come from. But that's your brotherly love. And so that's the love that you would have with mankind, your brothers, and
your
friendships and things like that. There's also a word, it's not used not used as much, but there's a word even for family love. There's lots of different words, but the main ones are those two, and then eros or eros, some people would say, which is where we get the word erotic. And that's your romantic, your the romantic love and the feelings even. I mean, it's love, but that would be your erotic feelings towards your spouse or somebody of the opposite sex. And so I think that people could make an argument and say, okay, well, fine, I have agape love towards my towards my spouse. Like there's this unconditional love, but that arrow stuff, I ain't in that no more.
Right.
And so, yeah, what do you do there?
Well, I think first of all, you just saying that they feel that committed love, I think that's huge. Like, I think acknowledging that you're in a commitment, and that you made a covenant, you made a decision in a covenant relationship, and not trying to get out of that, I think is huge. Like, that's a big first step, and not just running and saying I'm out, because I think a lot of people do that. They're like, I'm out. But saying, that you're staying is huge. With that being said, you don't want to stay in a relationship that's miserable. So what are we going to do to make it better? Like, if you feel like you're stuck and you're just, stuck there, like you said, then what can you do to make that better? Because I think, and I believe, and I try not to say I think too much because nobody really cares what I think. But from my experience and what Scripture tells me is, my experience was, if you take steps of obedience, okay, you're taking steps of obedience in your relationship, then the feelings will line up. Like, if you are taking steps in obedience and honoring your spouse and caring for your spouse, and it says in Scripture that it's like the relationship of Jesus to the church, that we're like the bride. Help me, Mr. Seminary.
Yeah.
Like, we are called the bride of Christ. It's like how he treats us.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing those things, and I mean, we could go into steps or examples of that if we need to, but I'm just saying, if you do things out of obedience, a lot of times your feelings will line up. Let me just give an example of that, if it's okay. I've talked about this before when it comes to studying Scripture or being in Bible study or, digging into the Word. There's a lot of mornings where I wake up to do that and I feel exhausted, or I'm just, I think, what passage am I reading today? Oh, this again, not really excited about what I'm reading. And there are times where I choose to do it because I'm doing it out of obedience, because I know that that's what I need to do to stay in the Word, to stay in my prayer life, to, that's the way I connect to God. Worship music, all of those things. And sometimes I do those things out of obedience because I know that that's what God has called me to do. And then my feelings line up. It's kind of like there's some Sundays, this used to be more common than it is now for me, but where I'd be like, oh, I don't want to get up and get dressed and do, but then I go and there's never one moment where I leave and think, I shouldn't have gone,
Yep.
Like it's always a good thing. And so I think that a lot of times we invest too much and put too much thought into our feelings. Our feelings can lead us astray.
Oh, yeah.
Our feelings can be a lie.
Well, they just change so much. I mean, feelings and emotions are just up and down, up and down, up and down. And I think that when we talk about falling out of love, that's why we're saying love's not a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are feelings and emotions involved in loving somebody, but that's not what love is.
Mm-hmm.
And because
your feelings are also based, a lot of times your feelings can be based off what the other person does.
Oh, yeah.
And that's giving your spouse way too much power.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I choose to love you as long as you're treating me well.
Right.
But if you make me mad, that's going to change how I feel about you and my love for you. Well, that's giving way too much power to your spouse.
Well, I think everybody probably, has days where you just feel like, I don't really feel like I love you today, or I don't feel like loving you. I don't feel like loving you in that romantic love, that erotic love. But that doesn't mean that you've fallen out of love. It just means that you need to, a lot of times it means you need to check your heart.
I would say 90% of the time.
Yeah, probably so. But there are but those feelings sometimes can be because your spouse has done something.
Sure.
I mean, like those, back in those early days of me finding out what you did, there wasn't a whole lot. I mean, my feelings were not lovable towards you.
Sure.
Although I'd never stopped loving you, but I didn't feel like loving you because of what you did to me. And so I think that there are, the feelings part of it. Yes, it can just kind of go up and down. I was thinking of this may seem like just such a silly and simple illustration or an example, but I just got back from Costa Rica. And I went to Costa Rica with my youngest son. We have a ministry there, and so we were able to go and kind of, check things out and see what they were doing. Well, when both of us, it's real easy for us to come back and to say, we love those people. Like, we love the Costa Ricans. And to be honest, like, they were nice to us and all that kind of stuff. So, and they provided for us while we were there. But to be honest, they haven't done anything that would cause us really to fall in love with them. We just love them because we have a heart for Jesus. We have a heart to see them have success in ministry and people to come to know the Lord, all that kind of stuff. And so if I came back and I was talking to somebody and I was like, man, I really love those people. Like the Costa Ricans and the people there, they just have my heart. I love them. And let's just say 5 years later, the same person I was talking to comes back to me and is like, hey, how's all that going with the Costa Ricans? And I'm like, well, I mean, I hadn't really had much to do with them. I don't really love those people anymore. Like, you would go, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I mean, maybe it's been 5 years that I haven't paid any attention to them or talked to them or communicated with them, but that doesn't mean I don't love them anymore. But
Right.
and if I actually said that and said those words, you would go, what is wrong with you?
Right.
How do you fall out of love with people?
Mm-hmm.
But we do that with our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could tell you today, I could sit here and talk about how much my wife and I love, and then 5 years later, somebody comes up and says, "Hey, how's that going?" I don't love them anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't, and that doesn't cause us to go, "Wait a second, that's stupid."
Mm-hmm.
We just do it. We just think we can fall out of love. But I think what happens is, even with the example of like the Costa Ricans, it's because love is a verb. If I don't spend, if I literally go 5 years or more without investing in them or praying for them or talking to them or going and visiting or doing what I can to help, then yeah, those feelings are not going to be the same that they are right now, because but that doesn't mean that I don't love them. So how do I get back to the way that I feel right now? I pour my heart into them and I pour my life into them. There's really, again, there is the different words for love. It's not erotic love that we're talking about with our spouse, but the principle, I think, is still there.
Yeah.
I think it's okay. Well, if there's for some reason you're not feeling that with your spouse, then just like what you said, start taking those steps of obedience and make love an actual verb and do the things that are going to cause you to have those feelings of love again.
Yeah, that's right. And another thing that I think is just so, so important is ask God to change your heart. Like, He is a miracle worker. He is a miracle worker just as much today as He was when Scripture was written. And I think a lot of times we think, yeah, He doesn't work like that anymore. He does. I mean, we were just listening Sunday to our pastor who just got back from Uganda telling about literal healings that he witnessed over, in Uganda. And we think that things like that don't happen anymore, but they do. And like, God wants our marriage. He is for marriage. He wants our marriage relationship to be beautiful and prosperous because He created it. He created it for us, and He wants that to be the case. And in James, in James 1, it tells us that if you ask for wisdom, it will be given to you. So you're asking for wisdom on how to love your spouse better. You're asking God to change your heart and your mind towards your spouse. Like, if you are not physically attracted to your spouse anymore, ask for God to change your heart. If you are, if they do something that, if they do things that drive you crazy, know that you do things that drive them crazy too, first of all, and then ask God to change your heart towards them. Like, ask God to soften your heart towards your spouse. Specifically say, God, help me be more physically attracted to my spouse. Help me to see the things that they do right instead of the things that they do wrong. Help me to see the places where they are really trying, and help me to see them and encourage them in that. So we talk all the time about God being a God of miracles because He worked a miracle in our life in infidelity, but He is a God of miracles in every area of marriage that we need Him to work miracles in. You just have to ask and beg and plead for Him to change your heart, or to change your spouse's heart.
We hear that everybody's heard this before, but we use the word love so flippantly too.
Sure.
It's
I love Taco Bell.
Right.
Except, why did I choose that?
Do you
No,
love Taco
I love
Bell?
Chick-fil-A. How's that? I don't know why. It's because I hear my kids say that all the time.
Yeah, they do love it.
Taco Bell breakfast specifically.
But we do. We just kind of throw it around like, oh man, I love those shoes. I mean, I love chicken or what, and then, but I love my spouse, or I love my kids. And it's like, well, what is love? And so I do think, the Bible has it right when there's different words used for love. And so, yes, we have that committed love that we have with our spouse, but I just think that it's so important, that word eros, that love, that's reserved for your spouse. And that's the kind of love that you don't need to feel like you're falling in and out of. That's the one that you need to strive to continue. Because you could be one of those people that's just like, I'm not attracted to my spouse anymore, so I don't really love them. I mean, I love them because I love everybody, and I love pizza, and I love, and you could say it that way and justify it, but that's not God's design.
That's right.
Like, God's design is you stood at an altar and you declared your love and your faithfulness and to cherish all of that. And you said it before God, and that's your commitment and that's your covenant. And so if you feel like that's not true anymore, then those are just feelings and emotions. And you need to, we say it all the time, but in order to have what you once had, you need to do what you once did.
Right.
And so maybe that it's getting back to doing the things that you used to do when you felt in love with your spouse.
That's right. How you've said on here, I teach school, and I do, and I cannot tell you how many times I say to children, I'm talking to 7 and 8 year olds, but treat other people the way you want to be treated. And that is so the case even in our marriages. Like, you have to treat your spouse in a way that you desire to be treated. The other thing that I say to them a lot is, if you want to have a good friend, you have to be a good friend. I mean, like, these are 7 and 8 year old lessons, and yet we get married and forget.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That they're just, we have to treat our spouse the way we want to be treated, and we have to be a good spouse to have a good spouse, and it's not a magic, a magic trick. There's still hard things. Gosh, there's hard things, but it's a rule that you need to constantly remind yourself of, and it's a truth that you need to constantly remind yourself of, is that God is for my marriage. I stood at the altar in a covenant relationship with my spouse and promised to love and adore them forever. And I'm not going to just fall out of that. I have to work hard. And yes, I've changed. And yes, they've changed. But we're doing this together. And your common thing is that you both love the Lord. And your common thing is we want to honor the Lord with our marriage. And that, if you're working towards that, you shouldn't be growing apart. You should be growing together.
That's good.
Is it? You're just like,
Well, there's just people out there I know that are listening that are like, you don't understand.
I know.
You don't understand what I'm going through, and you don't understand what I have to live with and what I have to put up with. And, and you're right, because we're not in your situation. But at the same time, you haven't been in our situation. And the whole reason why we do this is because we have this story of devastation and brokenness that we could have easily just said, okay, that's the end of it, and we had the right, I had the right to do that, to just say, that's it, we're done. But if I had done that, then we would never have been able to experience what we're experiencing now. And so as we encourage and talk to people, that's why we say, don't give up. And you may say, oh, well, this last year or these last 2 years have been, and I was talking to somebody recently who had been married, and they said for 3 years. And I was like, 3 and pretty much miserable for 3 years. And I was like, well, 3 years, that seems like a long time. But you and I have been married for 27 years. The first 15 years we thought were great, and then the affair happened, And now it's been another 12 years. And so, like, when you start thinking about the people that we've been having problems for a year or 2 years or 3 years, it is a long time. But it is a really small blip in the radar when you consider how great your marriage can be if you'll just hang on.
Right.
And just hold on to the hope, because what if you give it up and then you could have had the marriage that you always wanted? And that's just praying like crazy for your spouse to come around, and that's continuing to do the stuff that you know you need to do. And just let God work a miracle and expect it and pray for it. And it may not happen in your timing, but just hang on.
It's a good word.
Okay, well, it's time to go. Time to go to Taco Bell.
No.
I'm just kidding. All right. Hey, we're going to sign off, though. Thanks for being with us this week. Enjoyed being with you, and we will see you again soon.